Hey all you addicts out there, welcome back to another Addicted Fishing tutorial. My name's Jordan Carnegie with Addicted Fishing, and if you guys are new to this channel and it's your first time seeing it, we're Addicted Fishing. We release new content every day that inspires, entertains, and educates people to go out and enjoy fishing of all walks of life and in all different parts of the world. What we're doing today is a little tutorial piece on the 101 basics of how to go trout fishing. I'm going to go through and I'm going to show you the 3 different kind of setups I want to have when I go, the different baits and lures that we have, and then we're actually going to go down and give a quick run through on how to actually cast and use each one of the techniques properly so that you guys can stand to go out and have fun and catch fish. So if you guys want to see more, stay tuned, it's coming at you right now. So if you're gonna go target any kind of trout that we have in America, or again, anywhere in the world, you're gonna wanna have one of about 3 different things. One is some kind of lure or fly setup, which I'll show you in a second. 2 is some kind of bait, some kind of real live bait, whether it be some kind of night crawler or crickets or any kind of mealworm. Or 3 is some kind of artificial bait, whether it be a power bait or power eggs or anything like a marshmallow or any of the other things that you see in the tackle store or any kind of place you go to buy fishing gear. And having each one of those 3 are going to make you a better fisherman, because one of those 3 is going to work better than the others on a good day of fishing when you're out on the lake or out on the stream or creek trying to target these fish. So the first thing I'm going to start with is the most basic probably, and probably the easiest one to get familiar with, and it's the spinning model. What we have here is a 2 to 6 pound, all the rods I'm going to show you here are about 2 to 6 pound ultralight rating. The reason I like that is basically just for the flimsiness and the castability of that light rod. And 2, it's to be able to have a lot of fun fighting a fish no matter the size. If you catch a really big one, it kicks your butt. If you catch a little one, it's still a lot of fun to fight. But what I have here is a 2 to 6 pound ultralight rod. This one is 6 foot 6 inches long with a 2000 series reel on it. What I have on that 2000 series reel is a 10-pound braided line, and this is the same for each one of these setups. The only thing that's going to differ them is what I have tied to the end here. This setup is to fish any kind of lure, which I'm going to talk about first, whether it be one of these rooster tails, a spinner, or some kind of spoon setup, or a cast master that you're going to use to cast and retrieve. And that's why I say it's probably the easiest one to go with, because you cover a lot of water. It allows you to stay active in the fishing, and it's very, intuitive. You're constantly thinking and casting and reeling, as well as it's a good way to attract a bite. Trout are very aggressive little critters, and they want to chase stuff down and eat it. That's their natural aggression. So that 10-pound test goes down to about a 10-pound fluorocarbon bumper. That's not necessary, but I like to do it just so that I have a nice clear line that's not the braid going all the way to my spinner. It's a nice clear fluorocarbon line connected with a blood knot, which we have a lot of Addicted tutorials showing you on how to tie those blood knots, or any kind of uni knot or surgeon's knot, to connect the 2 braided line and the fluorocarbon line. And on the end of this here, I have what's called a rooster tail, or some kind of spinner. And what we're going to do is, when we go down and show you guys this, we're going to go over each one of these techniques in the same order that we're talking about them now. But this is my first and my easiest setup to actually go and cast and retrieve some kind of lure for these trout. So now that we've covered the spin rod setup, or the spinner setup, I'm going to go over and show you the first bait setup that I'm always going to go to the water with, and that is something that you're going to fish from the bottom. So what we have here is a sliding weight, same exact ultralight setup with the 10-pound test. What I have here is the braid tied straight to a barrel swivel, but above that barrel swivel I have a sliding weight, a free sliding weight that goes back and forth here. This is about a 1/4 ounce weight. You can use any size that you need to, given the kind of body of water that you're fishing. But what I have is that sliding weight connected to my 10-pound braid, so it can slide up and down, and so that bite registers all the way through my line, and when the fish tries to grab the bait, it doesn't feel the lead on the bottom. All it feels is the registration on the tip of your rod, so that you can see a light bite. I have a barrel swivel tied to hold that slide float, or the slide weight above that barrel swivel, and to the end of that barrel swivel I have a 6-pound fluorocarbon leader. Any kind of leader, whether it be monofilament or fluorocarbon, works great. I like the fluorocarbon because it's a little bit clearer and the fish can't see it. It's actually very, very, very hard to see in any color water, and it kind of matches that color water because it's clear. What I have here on the end of this now is a number 4 mustad bait hook. And the cool part about this bait hook really is the little spurs that it has on the back side of the shank of that hook. And that actually helps my bait stay on there no matter what's going on out there, whether I'm getting a bite or I'm casting far. It helps keep whatever bait you're using on that hook. You're going to want to use some kind of floating bait for this setup. And what I mean by a floating bait is some kind of power bait or some sort of power egg that has some sort of buoyancy on it so that you don't cast this out onto the bottom of the lake and it lays down and then your bait lays right on the bottom as well. So you want something that actually floats your hook up off the bottom and stays at some sort of distance above the bottom so the fish can swim up and eat that. You can use some kind of, you know, live bait like worms or anything else. You're just gonna have to add some sort of flotation, whether it be a corky or some kind of lure that's gonna actually float your presentation up off the bottom. Your leader length is always going to determine on what kind of bottom the lake or stream or whatever you're fishing looks like. If it has a lot of weed cover or a lot of structure on the bottom, you're going to want a longer leader to match that distance off the bottom that you need to be. So my leader here is about 3.5 feet. You can go up to 4 or 5, whatever's castable for you given the conditions that you're fishing. So the third setup I have here for you guys is a different way of fishing bait, and it's actually with a slide float system. Again, the same 6 to 12 pound rod, the 10 pound test, down to a 12-foot fluorocarbon bumper, 12 pound, about 12-foot fluorocarbon bumper. You can use the different length of that fluorocarbon bumper, again connected with a blood knot or any kind of uni knot. And I use the 12 pound here, even though it's a little heavy for some kind of trout fishing, so that my bobber stop, which is this little red stopper here that comes on a wire stopper, or any kind of nail knot will work, or you can even tie a little bead into your line wherever you want your float to stop. And that's gonna register how deep that you're gonna float with that sliding float. So you set that stopper, this slides up and down your line, and I use that 12 pound test because it's a little bit better at securing that red stop there, or any kind of a thread stop to your line. It won't hold on this 10 pound or on this 10 pound braided line. So I have the fluorocarbon bumper with the 12 pound with my little stopper, and then I have my sliding float. This is an 1/8 ounce float. You can use 1/4 ounce float. You can go all the way up to probably a half, but I wouldn't go too heavy on my float selection because you want those trout or whatever it is that's biting it to not feel that float as it gets pulled under. If you use too heavy a float, you're not gonna be able to see your bites, and you probably will not catch as many fish because they come up, feel the tension against them, and then spit that bait out. So this slides up and down my line from my barrel swivel here, and is stopped at whatever depth I previously set that by that red stopper. And that's the beauty of this, is I can fish in any kind of depth of water at any depth that I want, given where I think those fish are during the time of year. What I do next is I go down just below that float and I add 2 number 7 split shots. You can add more or less, how much weight you need for that given area, and then a barrel swivel that I tie my 12 pound test to, and then off the other end of that barrel swivel I'm going to tie my 6 pound fluorocarbon, or 8 pound. I probably wouldn't go above 10 pound just because you want a nice light presentation so that those fish can't see it. About a 2.5 to 3 foot leader down to, again, my mustad bait hook, number 4, and on this here I have a nice gross old night crawler that I was fishing a minute ago. But you can fish any amount of bait on the end of this in that selection. This is a very convenient way to fish because you can fish at any depth, basically fish any kind of structure anywhere you want. You don't get snagged as much, and it allows you to stay in front of those fish, whatever strike zone that they have. So this is all 3 of the setups. What I'm going to go over now, you guys, is some of the different bait selections and some of the different lure selections that I have. What I have next to me is there's tons and tons of things that catch these fish out there. But these are some of my favorite, and these are some of the most available to most people that are gonna go trout fishing for the first time, or maybe it's your 100th time and you're actually learning something here. But what I have next to me is I have night crawlers, I have some kind of canned corn, I have these power eggs here, which are little rubber artificial egg that are scented like garlic, these ones, but they come in a lot of different scents. Shrimp, any kind of crawfish, anything like that. I have your typical old school power bait, and then I have some salmon eggs here, and I also have some scent, which I'll go over in a second. And each one of these selections works just as well as the other, given a certain condition. A lot of times if you go to the river or the lake or anywhere that you have any kind of stocked fish or trout, and you're sitting next to somebody on the bank, and all you brought was your power bait, and guess what? They're biting on worms today. Or vice versa. They're not biting the worms, or they're not biting the power bait, but they're eating the corn like crazy. It's good to have a little bit of everything. I don't mean go to the store and buy hundreds of dollars worth of stuff, but buy each different kind of technique, because they all work in their own way when you're out fishing. The salmon eggs I'm going to recommend, or something like that, when it's a very natural bite, when the fish aren't eating a lot of artificial bait or anything like that, or artificial flies or whatever you're using at the time. Or you have the corn or the night crawlers, which is a very common and a very easy thing for those fish to recognize and go over and feed on. So Each one of these works a little bit differently in their own way. I'll demonstrate that more. And again, we have more addicted tutorials on this stuff that go over the extreme specifics on how to fish each one of these. So be sure to go to that channel, Addicted Fishing, go down below, search the videos, and go through the trout stuff so that you guys can kind of see a little bit more in depth even than we are today on how to use each one of these setups. But I'm gonna go over a little bit different ones as we start heading over to the lake here. I'm gonna go down to the water with you guys. I'm gonna show you how to fish each one of these presentations. So stay tuned, it's coming right at you. So now I'm standing by the lake, guys, and what I'm going to show you first is how to do the casting and retrieving of a lure. This is my, again, 6.5 foot setup here that I have with the rooster tail on the end of it. It's just a blue rooster tail. I'm going to show you kind of the dynamic and the ease of fishing something like this. The reason I like this one the most is because it's very active. You're going around, you're searching for the fish, you're not sitting in one spot all day, or if you want to relax, the setups we're going to show you next are a good way to relax and just sit on the bank. But this one here is going to encourage a lot of movement. You're not just going to stand in one spot all day and fish. So what we're going to do first, we're going to reel up to about 1.5 to 2 feet out of the end of your rod tip. Why I'm going to leave that much line out to cast here is so that when I do go to cast, it loads this rod because I have that springing action of the line and my lure. I use the weight of my lure to bend my rod to fling this out as far as I can. You don't really want to add weight a lot of the times to your lures like this to cast because it affects the presentation. It doesn't help you fish it well. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to keep my index finger on my line, I'm going to open my bail, and I'm going to make about as big a cast as I possibly can to try to get it as far out in the lake as I can so that I get a long period of fishing here. But what I like to do is I like to kind of work the river or the lake or whatever I'm fishing on in some sort of mathematical fashion. I start from left to right, I'll make 3 casts in one spot, and then I'll move on down the bank. I'm going to make my first cast about 45 degrees to the left of me out of the lake, and immediately as that hits the water, I want to point my tip at it and start reeling that blue fox or that spinner or spoon, whatever you have, back to you. I want to engage that blade so that it's spinning and giving some kind of reaction that's going to piss those fish off. Reel it all the way back in, and never stop fishing your lure too close to yourself. If you could, sometimes the fish will chase it all the way into your rod tip, so fish that lure all the way back to you before you reel up and make your next cast. Now that I made that first cast out towards my left, I'm going to go straight out in front of me here, kind of with the wind. I'm going to engage that spinner, and I'm going to keep my tip pointed right at it once again, pointed down so that my lure works its way down into the water column, and I'm just going to make a speedy retrieve back in, waiting for that fish to bite. And when a fish does bite, and when you do catch fish on these spinners, what you're going to feel is a really aggressive bite. All of a sudden your spinner is going to stop, or you're going to feel a tap, 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 or you're going to feel some kind of tug on the end of your line. And then with these, the nice part is they set the hook themselves. So it's automatic fish on. You don't have to give too big of a hook set, but I'll demonstrate the motion that you want to have if you do set the hook. So now that I've casted that third time, a little bit more to the right, what'll happen as you're coming in is you'll feel that fish grab or that tap, 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 and you're going to lift straight up in the air. And when you lift, you want to keep continuously reeling, keeping that tip in the air and holding tension against that fish. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow that fish to fight and swim all over the place, but having your rod tip high at a 45-degree angle and reeling steadily as that fish starts to fight is going to keep that fish hooked, because you're going to have that hook securely in his mouth and tension on your line so that he can't shake his head back and forth and spit that hook out. Okay, so now that I've casted my 3 casts here, I'm going to walk downriver or down the lake about another 10 to 15 yards and do my same 3-step cast covering a different part of the water. So now that I've moved down the bank about 20 yards, I'm going to do the same thing I did before, casting in 3 different directions, covering a good amount of water, and fishing my way all the way down the lake. A good way to learn how to catch fish on your given body of water is to fish a method like this where you're constantly moving around. Especially if it's a small lake, it's best to just keep moving, and if you can, walk around the whole thing. What it'll do is it'll help you identify and it'll help you find where there's going to be more fish, whether it be at the head of the lake, the tail end of the lake, the deepest part, or the shallower part. So it's a great method. The spinner and any kind of rooster tail or spoon is a great method to locate fish in a hurry and actively move your way around the lake and have fun fishing. Stay tuned, guys. We're going to grab one of the bait setups and we're going to take you down to the water again and show you how to fish that. So now the setup that I'm going to show you guys is how to fish the bait from the bottom of the lake. This is the same setup I showed you earlier with the sliding weight on my braided line to the barrel swivel with my 6-pound leader and then my bait hook once again. What's going to be imperative about fishing this way is using some kind of bait that floats. I mentioned that earlier, because we're going to want our bait up off of the bottom here because our weight system is going to be on the bottom. This is a great technique for fishing an area where you know there's a lot of fish, that you want them to just swim around and hunt for your bait rather than going to find them like you use the spinner for. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna show you how to rig this power bait up. The power bait or the power eggs or anything like that work really well for this because it floats very, very well. It's very buoyant on the end of your hook. What I'm gonna do here is I'm just gonna finger out a little piece of power bait here, probably about the size of, I don't know, a nickel or so. And I'm gonna form a small little oval shaped egg, basically, that's gonna go right over my hook here. I like to form it first in my fingers, just like so. You can see I kind of created a three-sided little glob of power bait there. What I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna hook my hook right through it, just like so. Then I'm gonna continue to kind of form that right on the end of that hook there, cover up the hole that I made, and that way it's gonna stay on my hook pretty well. And those little barbs on the back side of those mustad bait hooks work really well for this. So there it is, pretty little chunk of power bait on the end of that. So now what the key is with this setup is the casting. You don't want to whip it too hard. You want to be very light and delicate when you go to cast this. Sometimes you may need to even just use a little more weight so that you don't have to whip it so hard, because we want our bait to stay on the end there. So I'm going to reel up again to where there's about a foot or so in between my rod tip and my weight. You can see how much line I have sticking out here, about a foot to foot and a half. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to point my rod tip back behind me, opening my bail, and I'm just going to do a really slow, gradual, light and delicate, basically I call them a rainbow cast. You're going to throw it high in the air and as far as you can out into the lake, or sometimes if it's deep near you next to the bank, you're going to need to cast even further. But what I'm going to do here, because I need to go a ways out, I'm going to cast pretty hard and make sure to wait as that flies through the air, and make sure that you can see that bait doesn't fall off, or else you're going to be fishing out there for a long time with no bait on the end of your line. So nice easy cast out there into the lake. You saw I only saw 2 splashes, which is good. If I see 3 splashes, then my bait go flying way off into the middle of no man's land. I'm gonna reel back in and rebait that. So now that I've let that hit bottom and let it sink all the way down, I felt it thunk. The key is to take the slack out of your line. It's imperative to have some kind of rod holder. I just found a nice little stick in the bushes that had a little fork in it, and that's going to be my rod holder today. Whether it be your cooler, whether it be anything else, your backpack that you're going to use to prop your rod up, that's what's going to be key, is because you want your rod at about a 45-degree or 90-degree angle up and over the water, so that you can have tension on your line, so that when a fish does come and bite your setup, you can see that register on your rod tip and you can actually feel that bite. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to set my rod down here, my little rod holder, again sitting about a 45-degree angle or so up over the water. And the key now is to reel just enough to where you see a little bit of a bend in your rod tip there. You don't want to pull it too tight against your weight, because then it'll slide towards you. But you see how I have a slight bend in my rod tip. The line's at about a 45-degree angle up and over the water. And now there's no slack in between my rod tip and my bait out there. So when a fish does swim up and bite it, you're gonna see that register on the end of your line. It's gonna look like this. It's gonna swim up and you're gonna see it start to bounce up and down. Your typical trout bite. It's gonna look just like this. And all of a sudden it's gonna bite, and then you're gonna grab your rod, lift it up off your rod holder, wait till you feel that bite registering through the tip all the way down in your hand, and then again, a nice slow, gradual, but firm lift to set the hook. Keep that rod tip high and reel down to the fish until you feel it start to fight. So now what I'm going to demonstrate, guys, is last but not least is the slide float setup. What I have here is basically a different bait setup, and what I'm going to use on this one is some sort of live bait most commonly. You can use your power bait, you can use your natural little salmon eggs and stuff, but I like to use either some kind of night crawler or mealworm or some kind of natural presentation that naturally occurs in the lake or the body of water that you're in, because it's a sort of presentation that you suspend up off the bottom so that those fish actually can see it as they're swimming around, and you can adjust the depth up and down. So something like a night crawler or some sort of live bait works well because it's suspended up the bottom and it's working and it's trying to move out of the water column that it's in, so it's a very good attractant to those trout. So what I have here is some night crawlers. I'm gonna go ahead and put that on my hook here. Take one of these bad boys out. And what I'm gonna do here, just so I can savor some of my bait, is I'm only gonna use half of one. So I cut that night crawler in half. gonna stick my bait hook right through the end that I cut, just like so. Run it about 1 inch to 1.5 inches up my line, just past the eye of my hook. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna think about how deep it is out in front of me. If I know the body of water well, I'm gonna set it to my exact depth. If you're just learning that place, you're gonna wanna start shallow and work your way deep. And that's gonna help you stay off the bottom, stay unsnagged, and it's gonna catch you more fish. What I'll show you here in just a second is how to tell whether or not you're fishing too deep or too shallow. So what I have here is, I think it's about 5 to 6 feet out in front of us, maybe 10. I have my slide float set at about 3.5 feet. Since I want it to be a little deeper than that, I'm gonna slide that float into my stopper, just like so, and I'm gonna push it about another foot deeper so that I'm sitting at the right depth. Now what I'm gonna do is cast this out into the lake. Again, leaving about 1 foot to 2 foot. That's the beauty of those rubber stops, is you can actually reel past them through your guides and it still doesn't affect your cast. So I'm gonna open my bail, cast it out into the lake in front of me. So the way you're going to be able to tell that you're properly fishing is that your bobber is going to be sitting straight up and down, perpendicular to the water's surface. If it's laying on its side, which I'll demonstrate here in a second, you're going to be set too deep. That's how you're going to be able to learn the spot that you're fishing. So as long as my bobber is sitting straight up and down, it's pulling itself down, that worm's suspended in the water column, wiggling around, trying to attract those trout. And the key is as it sits out there, is to either lay your rod down, lean it up against the little rod holder like I showed you before, and not be moving your bobber around or your float, kind of inflicting that drift that you have out there. You want it to naturally sit without any affliction from your line and or the wind or anything else. So you want to leave that thing alone and wait for a bite. What a bite will look like is your bobber will start jumping up and down, and Sean will cut to a little B-roll footage here of us getting some of these bobber bites so you guys can see that. We're out on a real heavy fish lake today just making these tutorials for you guys, so chances of catching a fish right here aren't that great. But when that bobber starts to bob up and down, it's imperative that you do not want to set the hook too early. You want to wait for that bobber to completely submerge underneath the surface. Then you're going to reel down tight to the bobber and lift straight up in the air. Again, holding that rod tip straight up, not giving it back to the fish, holding it straight up and reeling at the same time until you feel that fish start to tug. So last but not least, before we leave you guys, I want to show you what an improper float setup looks like. What I've done here is I've purposely set my bobber stop too deep on my line, and I've let that weight go all the way down to the bottom. And as you see, you look at that bobber, it's laying parallel with the water's surface. That bobber's not floating straight up and down, it's not registering any sort of bite, and honestly it's not fishing at all because everything that you have is laying on the bottom there. So what I would do then, if I see it laying out there like that, is I'm going to reel up and I'm going to adjust my depth to the point where that bobber again is standing straight up and down. Alright everybody, well that pretty much wraps up our tutorial on how to catch trout here today. Trout fishing is a really fun sport that can get anybody into fishing, whether it be youth or any kind of beginner that's just wanting to go out and try to experience Mother Nature and the great outdoors and go out and catch fish and anywhere you live in the country or the world. So this is the techniques that work for any kind of fishing, whether it be trout, crappie, bass, anything like that. They're all very effective ways to catch fish, and I hope you guys learned a little bit and it makes it a little bit easier for you to go out and experience it for yourself. So from us at Addicted Fishing, we want to thank you guys so much for tuning in today. If you liked what you saw, be sure to go down here and hit that subscribe button and turn on those little bell notifications, because we have new tutorials coming out every single day on things like this that make you guys better anglers and allow you to go have more fun out there in the great outdoors. So thank you so much for tuning in today, you guys. You stay fishy and we'll see you out there.